let's take a look at the deadlift, the major hip-dominant lower body exercise. In this video, we're going to take a look at the key points to an effective and safe deadlift. We're also going to talk about not only what a deadlift should look like, but what it should feel like. I'll also have a couple of drills and tips for you to help you improve that technique. So I'm going to demonstrate a couple reps of the deadlift. You take a look and see if you can identify some key things as I do that. So, maybe you saw a couple things there. Let me start breaking some of the key points down for you. So the first thing, we want to make sure that we establish a solid stance. So our stance is going to have our feet about shoulder width apart with our toes pretty much pointed straight forward. Now, the deadlift, again, is a hip-dominant exercise, and it gets us going through what's called a hinging pattern, where we fold at our hips and we push our hips back. So, once we've established our stance, we want to remember that our hips pushing back is the main action of this movement, as opposed to squats, where our hips are lowering. So, I've got my stance, feet hip width apart, toes pointing forward. I know that I want to push my hips back. Now, there's a very important thing to keep in mind when we push our hips back. And that's that our knees don't stay locked. So I'm not going to keep my knees locked and try to push my hips back. I'm not going to get very far. So my knees actually do get to bend a bit, even though this is a hip-dominant movement. So what I like to imagine, I start from this very rigid top position, but as I begin to push my hips back, I imagine that I've just started to do a bit of an exhale, and my knees soften. Now in the actual exercise, you're not going to exhale at this point, but I just want you to imagine that that's that relaxed moment in your knees as you push your hips back. Like you just took a bit of an exhale and relaxed into those knees. So I'm going to push my hips back. My knees get to bend a bit to allow me to push those hips back. Okay? Now, one thing that will help you remember that these knees get to bend but they don't get to move forward is imagine that there's a glass wall, just above the height of your knees in front of you. If you bend your knees forward to push your hips back, you're going to smash through that window or bang up your knee. So make sure that as your knees bend to allow your hips to push back, that they're only bending and not moving forward. So I've got my stance. My knees soften up and allow me to push my hips back as far as I can. The next point is that our back has to stay straight. So I'm not going to curve my back as I get my hips back, and I'm not going to keep my chest up. In fact, if I try to keep my chest up, I'm not going to get my hips back at all. Now, there's one really great drill to practice this movement. It helps us keep a lot of those things in check. It's the glutes to wall drill. So we're going to imagine that this bench here is my wall. I'm going to set up with my heels about 6 inches away from the wall, get my stance ready. I'm going to remember that I'm folding at the hips, all the while keeping my back nice and straight, keeping that neutral spine. And I'm going to try to push my hips back so that they touch the wall behind me. Now that was pretty easy, that happened very quickly. But you can see that in order to allow myself to push my hips back, I did already have to bend my knees a little. So now I'm going to move just a little bit further forward, doesn't have to be much. I'm going to fold up those hips, push my hips as far back as I can. Each time I move my feet forward a little bit more, maintaining that stance. Push my hips as far back as I can. Now, I'm reaching my limit here on how far back I can go. I'm really feeling that stretch in my hamstrings, okay? But notice that my knees, my shins are staying pretty parallel, my knees aren't moving forward, and I'm keeping my back straight. If I were to move forward a little bit more and try to get my butt against, it's not touching, I might now start rounding my back, which will release some of the tension from my hamstrings and let me push my hips back. But now you can see I've exaggerated a bit. My back isn't straight at all, and that puts me in a really unsafe position. Okay? So start about 6 inches, maybe even less, from the wall. Push your hips back, your knees bend a little bit to allow that. Move forward a bit. Keep doing that until you reach that threshold where you can't touch it and you start feeling like the only way I can do it is to round my back. Now some of you might be saying, okay, you know what? Even when I'm pretty close, my hips just won't touch the wall. I keep trying to do that hinging, that deadlifting motion, but it won't touch the wall. What might be happening is that you're actually squatting instead. So instead of pushing your hips back, you might in fact be squatting, trying to touch your hips. And so they might not touch until you're all the way down here. Remember, this is that hip dominant motion. So I want the biggest action at my hips. Notice that my chest comes down, my back is straight, but my chest comes down as I push my hips back, right? That's very different from where I do a squat, where my chest stays upright and my hips go down. So we want to get that hinging action. Okay? So that's one drill that you can do, the glutes to the wall drill. Another drill that can really help with keeping that upper body nice and straight, keeping that spine neutral, where we're not rounded here or overextended here, is having our arms locked behind our back. So I've interlocked my fingers. I rolled my shoulders up to my ears, back and down. I'm keeping my abdominals engaged, my core engaged, my back is straight. Now I can do that same drill, but I'm going to use my arms as a way to let me know if I'm keeping my back straight. So if my back starts rounding, my hands start to leave contact with my glutes or my low back. If my arms start to bend, it's because I'm rounding my back. So keep those elbows locked, those shoulders down. There's a lot of tension from your shoulders down to your hands. Tight, 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 tight. And then push those hips back. And then moving forward and go through that drill.
Sparrow Young Kennedy, please report to the office. Sparrow Young Kennedy, please come to the office.
Okay, now that we've gone through those two drills, the glutes to the wall drill and those arms locked behind our back, the next thing that we want to do is now try out this deadlift. So I'm going to grab a kettlebell. I like to use a kettlebell to start practicing the deadlift because I can keep it right between my ankles, in line with my shins. Keeping the weight there as opposed to having something in front of me helps make sure that I really keep the load off of my low back and allows me to really engage my lats, these muscles under here. And I'll explain why that's important. So as I set up for my deadlift, I'm going to push those hips back. I'm going to reach for my kettlebell. I'm going to imagine that I'm breaking the handle of the kettlebell, that I'm snapping it in half. As I go through that snapping motion, and if you try this, you're going to feel that these lats, these muscles right here, really engage, they really contract. That helps keep those shoulders locked, and it helps keep my back straight. So I'm going to break that handle. Now the action of going through this deadlift is going to be driving my heels into the ground, and when I get to the top, squeezing my glutes and keeping everything nice and solid. Now I'm not just going to drop down to put it down. I'm going to lower, control, push my hips back, and place that kettlebell right between my ankles again, keeping my back nice and straight. So once again, I'm going to drive my heels in, squeeze my glutes, get nice and tall, don't overarch, and control, push those hips back, place the kettlebell down to the ground. The key feelings here are that driving of my feet, my heels into the ground, and as I get tall, squeezing my glutes and getting nice and tight. One way to make this a little bit more manageable is putting it up on a riser. These are just 2 foam blocks. But if you felt like, man, I can't even get to that kettlebell without rounding my back, put it on some elevation. So you set up exactly the same way, kettlebell between your ankles, shoot your hips back, break that handle, engage those lats, drive your heels into the ground. Imagine that you're trying to jump up to the ceiling and touch the top of your head to the ceiling. And come up, squeezing those glutes. And push those hips back. It's that inhale going down, exhale, going up as you drive your heels. Now, the kettlebell is one really great tool for doing this deadlift. Not everybody has access to kettlebells. You could use a dumbbell. So the way that I like to hold the dumbbell is one hand under here, and have the handle between my fingers. And it's the same action. Nice and tall, push those hips back, tap it, come on. If I'm doing 2 dumbbells, it's kind of the action like a barbell deadlift, okay? But now these handles are gonna glide on my thighs, glide past my knees as far as I can go, keeping that form, and then coming up. Everything else about the technique is the same. One of the things I want you to keep in mind, again, you're checking, maybe you can use a mirror to look at your form, but we want to remember the feeling here. So there's 5 points of tension we want. And this is the kind of the last thing I want you to keep in your mind before you get into your deadlifts. The 5 points of tension start right at the ground. So when I get to the top of that deadlift, I want to be solid like a statue. And these are the 5 places on my body that I want to tense to help me get solid. The first one is my feet. You want to imagine your toes are gripping the floor. Your whole foot is making contact with the floor. The next is your knees. You want to imagine you're pulling your kneecaps up to your hips. So they're relaxed, tight. I'm pulling them up to my hips. The next is your glutes. Squeeze those glutes. Give them a little tap. Nice rock hard. Engage those abdominals like you're pulling your ribs down to your hips. Shoulders up, back, down, lock down. Tighten this position. So let's start on our feet. Grip the floor. Pull up our kneecaps. Squeeze our glutes. Engage our abdominals. Lock our shoulders. Couple short, sharp breaths. Holding this position. And relax. You should feel pretty light after that. So when you do your deadlift, you shoot your hips back, setting up, grip it. In that one moment of being a tall statue, all those things are tense. And then you ease out of that tension, push your hips back, and put the kettlebell down. So, those are the key points for the deadlift. Those are the things you want to feel, and that's how you want it to look. So if you have questions about how to execute a deadlift safely and effectively, make sure to talk to your phys ed teachers. For now, start with just body weight, and then eventually you can move up to using a kettlebell or dumbbells, or maybe someday a barbell.